Alright, we've got a quick little double feature here. Azelf is, of course, the quintessential DPP lead, and I have a video called The Evolution of Lead Azelf if you want more details on that. But the reason it is so definitive, in short, is because it is the best at getting up rocks and starting your team off with a ton of momentum. Taunt, U-turn, Thunderwave, and of course a big, strong explosion. To say nothing of its options for dipping into its vast coverage, the different ways it can EV itself to take on would-be answers, not to mention items as well. So, Azelf is the DPP lead because it starts off offense with a bang, and then you have the tools. If you have a good team, if you play it well, then you will have the opportunity to really ride that momentum to a victory. So, imagine one surprise, then, when Azelf just explodes on the first turn, and that is not a random boom either. That was not just Void saying, oh, well, a Suicune lead, I better throw away my rocks and just blow it up. No, that is a Choice Banded explosion. And Azelf has considerable offenses, of course, which are often overlooked because of its amazing leading and support capabilities, and people can kind of tend to forget that it is very scary in its own right. And the most consistently scary of these options is, of course, a Choice Banded lead, which can completely turn the game on the first turn. Like, for example, let's say you have a D-Knight lead against a CB Azelf, and you think it's a Rocks Azelf, so you're just, I'm just going to Draco Meteor, and it Ice Punches you on the first turn, and goodbye D-Knight. That's a big change. Or, another example, T-Tar, or let's say Heatran or Jirachi switch in. Oh, this is going to rock, or then it's going to U-turn, whatever, I can take a boom, and then Choice Band Boom just blows them away. It's that strong, it cuts through resists. Same goes for T-Tar, except T-Tar also gets stung horribly by a banded U-turn. So, I think CB Azelf is not just great because it's CB Azelf, because it's an alternative to the Rocks lead, and because it gets stronger the more and more people expect Rocks. It goes forgotten every once in a while, and then people remember it exists, and then, we kind of go in these cycles. But for me, CB Azelf is not just great because CB Azelf is great, but because of what it represents, which is the sheer number of options at someone's disposal if they want to run an effective offensive team and disrupt bulk, because a lot of discourse in DPP right now revolves around bulky teams being too consistent, too difficult to deal with, and something as simple as a classic CB Azelf can turn the tables on that so brutally. So, yeah, and it's also great to see it work against offense as well. I mean, that's the great thing about CB Azelf. It is reliable. You don't even have to run Ice Punch on it necessarily. I think Trick is a pretty nice option for messing with bulkier Jirachis without having to blow up, and then you still have that nasty boom later. It's really good. You mess with Rest Hawk Rotom very well because you don't want to click Zen Headbutt into it very much. Although if you turn out a Rest Hawk Rotom and in comes a Pursuit Tar, that's trouble too. And then they have one less Explosion Absorber. Anyway, this is not just a diatribe on CB Azelf. I also wanted to highlight the use of Lead Suicune, which is a great lead. And that's not really what this video is about, but it is an underrated choice because it also messes with Lead Azelf because it Calm Minds on Stealth Rock, and then protects on Boom, and it can also Hydro on an expected taunt. You don't want to taunt because then Hydro might 2 KO you, and then you get rocks without booming. And then the Calm. So there's a lot of mind games. It could go a bunch of different ways. Suicune can also figure out a way to run Sub over Protect, because that also helps against Metagross leads. Things of that nature. So Suicune has a lot of good options in the lead slot, but it's not going to be protecting on the first turn. So even here we see Banded Azelf putting in a lot of work on the first turn. So in comes Heatran, which is the quintessential CB Azelf partner, going back well over a decade at this point, if you're not going to be rocking with Azelf, then go with the most reliable rocker in the game at that time. So, Laurel's getting out of there with U-turn, which looks like Scarfrachi, also very old school, and goes to his own Heatran, which is saying, I'm Shuka, you better get out of here. And Void says, I am not Shuka, I am not staying in. In comes Suicune. So, Suicune of his own, Hydros, and it depends on the Heatran. If it is a classic Shukatran, then it does have a very good chance to get KO'd by Timid Hydro Pump. Mata's Hydro Pump crushes it, but also if it is a classic Shukatran, then it is not going to... Timid would outrun Mata Suicune, so... But then again, if it also has a chance of being naive, which they ran at that time a lot. And timid means that full health Suicune is not going to die to the explosion. So, yeah, this kind of dynamic it's very interesting how I think Suicune is another one of those Pokemon that has so much potential against defensive teams, but kind of gets overlooked because of how easy it is for it to just fall flat. It has to be used very precisely. This is why I'm also a big fan of Healing Wish with it. But like I was messing around with Calm Mind, Mystic Water. Like, yeah, you lose health in sand, but you can pair it with Rain Dance if that's going to be that big a deal. Or just punish early T-Tar really hard. You can structure your team that way. And that way you really plow through Clef. And it's not going to T-Wave you because it's going to think it's Lumberry, for example. So yeah, even Calm Mind, Hydro, Clef, Suicune struggles to break through Clef, but with Mystic Water, then you're really pushing it over the edge, and then everything else is starting to really get scared. So it's worth considering. And against offense, obviously Suicune is one of the best Pokemon you can have. I mean, this whole Gyarados craze that's been going on, I mean, Suicune just sits on it so hard, with HP Electric, of course. So yeah, and you can see that here where Laurel sacrifices his Heatran very early on. I mean, the crit explosions certainly helped there, because not quite sure it would have KO'd otherwise. Probably unlikely, if it's a minus attack nature anyway. And if it's... I mean, there's too much to speculate. It could be minus speed. It could be one of those Heatrans. But, the way he switched it into Void's Heatran makes me think Shuko, which is why I'm going through all of these possibilities, and not the possibility of it being, like Spadef Custab or something. But yeah, sacrificing your Heatran this early in the game just to stop Suicune just is a great demonstration of how scary it is, because Zapdos is a lot less popular these days, which is a factor that contributed greatly to Suicune being used less against offense, because if Zapdos is going to be everywhere, then it's kind of a pain. But when Zapdos gets replaced, quote unquote, by Latias, then suddenly Suicune's a lot scarier. It reminds me of that 2009 dynamic where a lot of teams' answers would be go to Latias and trick the +1 Suicune your specs and die to Ice Beam, just so you slow the Suicune down after just getting rid of your Latias. So think of that Heatran as something similar. Then comes a Flygon. So this is a very old school team from Void. I mean, CB, Azelf, Rocks, Heatran, offensive Suicune, and then Flygon. And it could be mixed, but Laurel's behind, so he can't really afford to scout for it. He has to assume that it is going to be Scarf. And I mean, on these teams, it is likely to be, or very likely to be Scarf. Likelier than mixed, either way. The Outrage does a lot, so a very offensive Loom, and makes me think about how underrated Choice Band Flygon continues to be. So, yeah, he gets the Spore off, and now in comes another great anti-offense Pokemon, Gengar. So, generally, when you see the classic set of 6 Pokemon here, was Azelf, Heatran, Suicune, Flygon, Breloom, and Calm Mind Jirachi. That was a team used by Rat Cheesy and Taylor as well. They had different sets though, but yeah, it was very popular around that time. There's also some alternatives with CB, Azelf, Heatran, Kingdra over in the Suicune slot, and then Flygon, Gengar, and Metagross in the last. Trick Iron Ball or Agility or things like that. So this is a very old school structure. It has all the tools in the world to be successful nowadays as well, even in this Latias metagame. So in comes Gengar. So Flygon out of commission, which is great. I mean, you want to take Scarf Flygon out of commission against offense for sure. And yeah, you're going to have to deal with the annoying thing that is Gengar, but hey, Jirachi can take 2 hits, and you Focus Blast and not let a Heatran, T-Tar in for free. Nice move. And Jirachi is going to scare it out because it looks like Scarf. And then it T-Waves, and everyone kind of goes, whoa. And I'm like, is that Scarf T-Wave? That's awesome. That's not only is this Scarf Jirachi, which is very old school, but it's Scarf T-Wave, which I've never seen on Scarf Jirachi. And then it U-turns like, oh, it's not. I don't know what that set is, but it's not a very standard variant. So in comes Latias, and it's going to launch a Spec Surf, and Void is definitely running a very Spadef Heatran, because as you can see, he has nothing else in the way of Draco answers. And even if his last is DD Tar or something, or another Steel, then it's going to be an offensive cleaner, right? Even if it's Calm Mind Jirachi or something, then it's still not going to be the kind of Pokemon that wants to take Latias on. So he's got to have a lot of bulk on this Heatran, as this is 65 is less than the minimum roll against just max HP Heatran. So this has a lot of bulk. And yeah, so The point I'm making is that it's going to be very bulky, and it's also very likely going to be Custap to get more use out of it. You know, if you're going to bulk it out, you're not going to have a lot of speed on it, and that way Custap lets you retain some form of speed when you've been knocked down to low health, in a sense. And also if you get parried, as is the case. So he goes for Fire Blast, doesn't even go for Explosion, and there's a reason for that. So right now, Void is feeling behind, but here is the other aspect of the game, or under aspect of the tier that I wanted to explore alongside CB Azelf, and that is Empoleon, which is very possibly the best comeback artist in the entire game. So, even if Laurel has a Scarfer that can take on the Empoleon and Mach Punch Breloom, it's still a threat, because Empoleon's typing is amazing. A resist Dragon and Water, which is the only Pokemon besides Shedinja in the entire game to do that pre-Ferrothorn. So, and of course, its agility sets are just nightmares. And what's really cool about the agility sets is not just that they, take over the late game against offense, but if they are Substitute and Petaya, then they also launch themselves to enormous levels of power. And these are good against offense, too. It's not like offense just drops once it boosts its speed. Sometimes you will need that extra power to muscle through something like a Metagross. But it's also really good against Stall, because first of all, Substitute protects you against, Jirachi paralyzing you. But also because Stall is like, okay, well, it's boosting its speed, I don't really care, I'm just going to stall out its attacks, which is also not an easy prospect. But, and Empoleon in general is just so underrated, I find. It has so many great sets. But we're focusing on Sub Petaya. But yeah, with Sub Petaya, then suddenly your Surf is Torrent and Petaya boosted, or Hydro, but, don't let yourself get Torrent stalled, or Hydro stalled out with APP and Protect. That can get really ugly. You need some, push against Clef, but hey, that should be part of your game plan anyway. So, yeah, and then Ice Beam. Petaya Ice Beam is going to absolutely crush Latias. So, yeah, if you pair it with Pursuit, I'm sure you could even get away with Hydro Surf. No, don't do that. That's, maybe. Anyway, point being that Agility, Petaya, and Empoleon is not just, it's great against offense, great against defense, and it's great at pulling off comebacks. Because, as you see here, it kind of throws Laurel for a loop. His timer's really low. It's down to 30. And because there is a move for him to make, because his last is Scarf Rotom, and it's actually modest Scarf Rotom, because in conjunction with Mach Breloom, then you don't really need it to outspeed Agility and Empoleon, but, he doesn't really take full advantage of that, because he doesn't think it's Sub, maybe. He thought, because Sub Petaya is not as common, because Agility 3 attacks has the benefit of also running a resist berry. Usually Shuka, could feasibly be Chople or even Wakan, but usually Shuka. And so, in that sense, he wanted to just, push more damage on it and heal and put it into Breloom's Mach range and preserve his Scarf Rotom. But then when the Empoleon agilities and so now he thinks, okay, it's going to be 3 attacks. I've put it in range. I will now sacrifice my Jirachi and then revenge it with Breloom. And now the Empoleon subs and the game is over. So, well, not necessarily game over if the Rotom outsped it, but at that point, then he's looking not great against the Gengar Custap Heatran combination with Latias and because Gengar takes a hit and even if the Rotom doesn't outspeed the Empoleon, sorry, then it's going to be whatever he picks to finish it off, whether it's the Mach Breloom or the Rotom, then he's just not going to have enough to finish his way through the Gengar and the Heatran without getting KO'd first in return. So yeah, the move was to go right to Rotom as Empoleon agilitied, because it's not going to kill Rotom without going down to Petaya Torrent range. And if it does that, then you could sacrifice the Rotom and still have the Jirachi, first of all, to help with Gengar. And you could even feasibly sacrifice something and preserve the Rotom if you wanted to go that route. So basically, something like that was better. Or if it's modest specs Latias, you could just stay in and keep surfing, but Yeah, I think you needed to preserve Breloom's Mach to also finish off the Custap Heatran. But yeah, this is just an example of how, yeah, Laurel messed up, okay, sure. But Agility Empoleon is so scary, it also introduces this kind of psychological factor where it kind of makes opponents mess up, even if they shouldn't. As funny as that might sound. Because it's just... it's such a game-ending Pokemon that you kind of panic when you see it. It's kind of like SD Lucario in that sense. So, obviously he doesn't rely on opponents messing up for it to be successful, but it is something to be considered for how amazing it is. Yeah, so this winds up being... actually, Timid Empoleon can outrun Scarf Rotom, I think. It should be able to... What's the math? Scarf Rotom is... Yeah, it can. Because, yeah, okay. Anyway, I'm not going to say the math out loud because I might have messed it up. But if I'm just remembering my DPP, idiosyncrasies correctly, then Timid Empoleon does outrun. But I think you really need Modest for the power when you're dealing with defense. So, deal with Scarf Rotom another way. I mean, Pursuit. Yeah. So this is the Empoleon factor. I think it's just such an amazing Pokemon. I always am happy when I see it because it's just so excellent. It perpetually seems underrated. It's so weird, whether it's a lead or a bulky set or agility or even offbeat stuff like utility or specs or SD even. So yeah, love seeing that happen. And yeah, very old school team. And then there's this other game where we see another Azelf lead. And it also immediately blows up the Zapdos. And you're like, whoa, what's happening here? And we see another Heatran, or two Heatran staying around. And this time also switching onto the Heatran, going to Suicune. So very similar. If Mishimoto's team is, or it plays, are very similar to the ones Void was taking. And of course, Malekith clearly is saying, I'm not shooting Heatran either. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to Latias. And now here comes the bulky Heatran, and it was in fact Custap Berry. I guess that kind of gives away that he's using the exact same team, but he is. It wasn't like he was also using a CB Azelf, Spadef Heatran, Suicune team that would just happen to be, 3 Pokemon different from the one Void was using. So yeah, Rocks, and now Suicune. Wow, now Suicune coming into Heatran, and Hydro Pumping, and sacrificing itself. As a Malekith also gets Rocks, and also blows up. So once again, that same dynamic of, hey, Suicune is really difficult to deal with. I guess we're just putting a spotlight on so many different Pokemon, not just Azelf and Empoleon. But yeah, there's the explosion, and it does not quite take Empoleon down. In comes Latias, and it even shows Thunderbolt. So Specs Thunderbolt is very cool. So in comes Flygon, scaring it out with the Outrage, and Malekith stays in, because if Flygon locks into Outrage this early, then yeah, he'll lose Latias, which will be a bummer, but then he will also be able to take out Scarf Flygon, and Scarf Flygon being taken out against offense, again, very, very good. So, Draco into Heatran, very nice, it does a good chunk. Now he's going to T-Tar, to not, lose it unnecessarily. And he's also got the Custap on that Latias, which is potentially really huge, because after his next round of rocks, he is in Custap range, and so he can scare out the Scarf Flygon. He doesn't even have to use it, because if you are in Custap range and then you switch it in and then you switch out afterwards, you will still have it, and he has 2 more switches into Stealth Rock, so he could scare out the Flygon with the Custap Draco, and then switch out and then still have the Custap later. So anyway, here comes T-Tar, here comes Flygon to check it, and it just eats a big crunch. We don't know if that's utility or DD or what. It's gonna EQ no Shuka though, so he's not going to go to Latias here, surely. Yeah, no, and it's another Breloom. Hey, now he's gonna shut something else down, whether it's the Flygon or something else. And we know there's a Gengar in the back, but the Gengar doesn't want to get spored, so it almost makes you wonder, should he preserve the Spore? But it's really not going to make that much of a difference. So, if anything, then if you Spore and then the Gengar switches, then you could Seed Bomb it on the switch and actually, weaken Gengar. Not that you really need to weaken it, but, it could make a difference here. So, especially depending on the bulk level of the Breloom, if it can take a Shadow Ball or not. So, there's the Spore. And now, I believe he just goes for the Seed Bomb as Gengar comes in. Yep, have to be very aware of the Gengar threat with offense. One of the few ways to try and turn the tables on Breloom post-sleep. Sleep Talk Gengar is very unreliable, I wouldn't. So in comes a Shadow Ball, and it is going to take out Breloom. It's not that bulky. And it's not that invested, I should say. And which is fair, you need speed and offense. Anyway, here comes Latias with that Custab Draco threat. And what's going to happen? Flygon comes in, and the Custab Berry does go off. It doesn't really get needed. But Malekith Healing Wishes. And now you're wondering, okay, what's going on here? Because the last Pokemon, we know, if you've watched my video on DPP Healing Wish, then you know the mechanics, and if you haven't, go check that video out. It's very recent. But the point being made here is that with DPP mechanics, then the Pokemon switching in will take hazards and then heal up to full. So I'm like, oh, is he going to heal up a Gyarados or something? So it doesn't have to take rocks? That might be significant, but no, it's Empoleon, and Empoleon doesn't care about, rocks or sand or anything. So, I mean, it's nice that it's at full health for sure, but why? And then you realize, oh, he didn't want to, he did not want to heal, he did not want to KO the Flygon because he wants to take advantage of it for agility and Empoleon setup because it has not slept any turns. So the first agility is guaranteed, and and Flygon still doesn't have a great chance to wake up afterwards, so you can KO it or get the second agility to outrun it, because Scar Flygon does outrun Empoleon. Or Jolly Flygon outruns even timid Empoleon, whereas Adamant Flygon does not outrun timid Empoleon, so that's how I remember that the Scarf Rotom thing was correct. Anyway, yeah, it could be Shuka Empoleon as well, but yeah, then since we know the last on Mishimono's side is an Empoleon as well, then the Shuka Empoleon would probably not beat the what's it called? The Petaya one. So, yeah, but I wanted to highlight that because once again we are seeing another amazing example of how potentially game-ending Empoleon is. How excellent it is in that role, and how you're gonna sacrifice the Latias and just to get this endgame setup. This is exactly the kind of Pokemon you want in this position, because you can go for the late game DD Tar and whatever, but that's a Pokemon that is naturally going to be checked by a lot. And not that Empoleon checks aren't common, but they're a lot easier to overwhelm potentially. Like Breloom Mach punching Empoleon is not the same as Breloom Mach punching DD Tar, for example. And Empoleon just has such robust typing and great bulk. So, and of course the power. Empoleon is nearly peerless in its power, and that's another reason why it's so good at cleaning up late game. I mean, the others, not to say like DD Knight is weak or something, but Empoleon's just got the right blend of coverage and strength and typing as well, because, I mean, DD Knight is strong, but also rocks and sand, whereas Empoleon, hello. So, Flygon sleeps again, and there's the other agility, just to be on the safe side, because, why not, if you're just going to KO it after. And here comes the Surf, no Hydro. So, not even revealing Ice Beam. Nice. So, in comes the Empoleon, and a Surf, and another Surf. But yeah, this seems fairly simple because Malekith's is stronger, right? But couldn't he just... But, oh, now it's not so simple, because if Malekith is just 3 attacks, then he will... what he wants to avoid is just Surfing again, and knocking the Empoleon into Torrent Petaya range, and then getting KO'd in return. So what he would want to do is almost, Ice Beam, if that's gonna do 3% or whatever. Ice Beam actually would still probably knock it. Well, no, Ice Beam would knock it into Torrent range, but it wouldn't knock it into Petaya range. So you would use Ice Beam there, because you could still take a Torrent Surf, but and then you would hope that Mishimono knocks you into Torrent range, and then you KO the Empoleon. Then Malekith's Empoleon KOs Mishimono's Empoleon with the Torrent Surf from 37. And then that's the game. But it doesn't even come down to that, because Malekith is indeed sub-Petaya. So he subs, gets Petaya, and Mishimono actually subs there. And that was a beautiful move on Mishimono's part, because he's counting on it being non-Petaya Empoleon. Because if it is, then he's toast anyway. But if Malekith does try that trick of, I'm going to Ice Beam so I live the Torrent Surf, then if you sub on that Ice Beam, then you win. because you still have enough, and I mean, it's self-explanatory, but the Ice Beam to avoid putting it into Petaya range, and just, live the Torrent Surf, and then it subs, and it gets its Petaya as well, and it's even protected from the next attack, so then it just wins, right? So that was a great move, Ice Beaming in that sense, and it only goes wrong if Malekith reads that and surfs instead, because you can't withstand the surf and then sub. But that was a very heads-up play. But of course, Malekith is sub Petaya, which I'm a big fan of seeing here to really clean up, really put the clamp down with the power late in the game. And yeah, so now he is going to just surf 4 times, and that's the game. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have gained a greater appreciation of many of the Pokemon used in this game. I mean, offensive Suicune also really showing its stuff just by virtue of how it provokes Heatran into blowing up on it immediately. Breloom and Gengar were stars as well. But CB Azelf, insane. And obviously, we saw just 3 sub-Petaya Empoleon in 2 games, so I was very happy about that. So I look forward to seeing more Empoleon in the future, and CB Azelf as well, but I'm a big Empoleon fan, so yeah. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.